The sky turned black on a Tuesday. Not that they had names for days yet, but it happened suddenly. One morning the sun was there. By afternoon it was gone. Ash fell like snow for weeks. The rivers ran thick with dust. The animals died first, then the children, then the hope. 74,000 years ago, a volcano called Toba erased 99% of the human species in a single generation. The few who survived huddled in caves, eating insects, drinking muddy water, waiting for a sun that would not return for 10 years. Every human on Earth today is their great-grandchild. But here is the truth nobody tells you. Toba was not the worst of them. Before the sky turned black, the world was warm. The ice ages had paused. Forests stretched across Asia, rivers ran full and clean. And humans were everywhere. Not like today, not billions. But tens of thousands of small families scattered across Africa and India and China. They had no cities, no writing, no metal tools, but they had something better. They had knowledge. They knew which plants healed, which animals traveled in herds, which caves stayed dry during the rains. They told stories around fires at night. They buried their children with flowers when they died. They had survived everything the earth had thrown at them for 200,000 years. And they had no idea that their greatest test was sleeping beneath their feet. On the island now called Sumatra, a mountain stood silent. It had been quiet for so long that no living human had ever seen it move. The ground around it was green. Rivers flowed from its slopes. Animals grazed on its lower hills. Humans hunted in its shadow without fear. They did not know that beneath that mountain, a chamber of magma the size of a small sea had been filling for 500,000 years. They did not know that the earth was about to open. The mountain did not warn them. No tremors. No smoke, no strange behavior from animals. One morning, the birds sang, the sun rose. The hunters left their camp. And then, without a whisper, the world ended. The explosion was not loud. Not at first. It was deeper than sound. It was a feeling. A pressure that pushed against every chest within 1,000 kilometers. Then came the light. A flash so bright that witnesses a continent away thought the sun had fallen. The mountain did not erupt, it vanished. The top of Toba turned into a hole 20 kilometers wide. The magma chamber below emptied itself into the sky in a single terrible minute. Imagine every volcano you have ever seen on video. Multiply that by 3,000. That was Toba. The ash column rose 50 kilometers high, twice the height of jet planes. It hit the stratosphere and spread sideways like an umbrella of death. Within hours, ash began falling across half the planet. Not gentle ash like from a campfire. This was sharp, suffocating. It buried forests, choked rivers, collapsed roofs. In India, the ash piled 6 meters deep. That is taller than a 2-story house. Every living thing beneath it died, not slowly, within days. But the ash was only the beginning. The real horror was invisible. It was already rising into the sky, and it would not come down for 10 years. The sulfur dioxide reached the stratosphere, high above the clouds, above the weather. And there it turned into tiny particles that did something terrifying. They reflected sunlight back into space. The sun did not disappear overnight, it dimmed. Slowly at first, then faster. Within months, the sky was the color of old bruises. The temperature dropped, not by a few degrees, by as much as 15 degrees in some regions. The growing season vanished, fruits did not ripen, grains did not form. Animals starved because the plants they ate had died. And humans, who had survived everything for 200,000 years, began to die too. The genetic evidence is still there inside you. In 1998, a scientist named Stanley Ambrose looked at human mitochondrial DNA. That is the part you inherit only from your mother. He found something shocking. Every person alive today shares a common ancestor from roughly 74,000 years ago. That means the human population collapsed to almost nothing. How small? Some estimates say 3,000 breeding individuals. That is fewer people than live in a small town today. You exist because those 3,000 found food, found shelter, found each other, through a decade of darkness. But here is what makes Toba truly disturbing. That was not the only time we almost vanished. There were 9 more events waiting in the shadows of our past, and the next one came from the sky. Fast forward 61,000 years. The ice age that followed Toba had finally ended. The great glaciers were pulling back, forests were returning, and humans were doing something they had never done before, thriving. They had spread across Europe, Asia, and into the Americas. A culture called the Clovis people had mastered hunting. Their stone spear points were works of art and weapons of war. They followed the great herds. Mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths the size of elephants. The world was warm. The future looked bright. And then, in the span of a single human lifetime, everything froze again. The Younger Dryas, named after a tiny Arctic flower whose pollen suddenly appeared in European caves. That flower only grows in freezing conditions. And 12,800 years ago, it spread across continents that had been mild and green. The temperature dropped 10 degrees Celsius in less than a decade. Ice sheets began advancing again. Forests turned to tundra, the herds vanished, and the Clovis people, the most successful hunters of their time, began to disappear. Something had pushed the planet back into the Ice Age just as it was escaping. But what? For decades, scientists had no answer. Then, in 2007, a team of researchers found something buried in the dirt. Something that should not exist, and it changed everything. The layer of dirt is called the Younger Dryas boundary, and it is only a few centimeters thick. But inside that thin band of ancient soil, scientists have found things that should not exist together. Microscopic diamonds, not the kind you wear on a ring. These are nanodiamonds, formed only under extreme heat and pressure. Melted glass. Spherules that look like tiny marbles, created when rock vaporizes and recondenses, platinum. An element rare on Earth's surface but common in comets and asteroids. And soot. Massive amounts of soot from continent-wide wildfires. All of it dated to exactly 12,800 years ago. The same moment the climate collapsed. Here is what the evidence suggests. A comet or asteroid, possibly as large as a kilometer across, broke up in Earth's atmosphere. Instead of one crater, there were thousands of airbursts. Explosions in the sky. Each one as powerful as a nuclear bomb. They rained fire across North America. The heat was so intense that forests burst into flames from horizon to horizon. The smoke rose into the stratosphere and blocked the sun, and just like Toba, the world cooled. But this time, humans were not just starving, they were burning. In 2019, researchers found something even more disturbing. A 31-kilometer-wide crater buried beneath a glacier in Greenland. And the date? It fits perfectly with the Younger Dryas event. The Clovis people did not have a word for extinction. They did not know they were watching the end of the world. They only knew that the mammoths were gone. The mastodons were gone. The giant ground sloths, the saber-toothed cats, the enormous bison the size of a truck, all of them vanished. 35 entire types of large animals wiped off the continent. The fires had killed the plants. The cold had killed the survivors. And without the great herds, the hunters had nothing to eat. The Clovis culture disappeared within a few generations. Their spear points, so carefully crafted, stopped appearing in the dirt. Their campsites went silent. Their children grew up in a world of ash and hunger. But it was not just North America. Ice cores from Greenland show the cold was global. Europe collapsed. The people there had been painting caves and carving statues. They stopped. They abandoned their settlements and scattered into small, desperate bands. In the Middle East, culture called the Natufians had been experimenting with farming. They were the first people to stay in one place, to build villages, to plant seeds. The Younger Dryas drought forced them to abandon everything. They went back to wandering, back to foraging, back to the old ways. For 200 years, humanity held its breath. Then the world warmed again, and something unexpected happened. The survivors who came out of the cold were not the same people who went in. They had changed. And their change would lead directly to the first civilization. Imagine the largest hot desert on Earth. Sand dunes stretching past the horizon. Temperatures hot enough to cook an egg on a rock. No rain for months or years. Now erase all of that, because 10,000 years ago, the Sahara was not a desert. It was a jungle. Grasslands stretched across North Africa from the Atlantic to the Red Sea. Rivers flowed where there is now only sand. Lakes the size of small countries held fresh water teeming with fish. Hippos waded in the shallows. Elephants roamed the savannas. Giraffes ate leaves from acacia trees, and humans lived there. Thousands of them. They fished from boats. They herded cattle. They painted pictures of their world on cave walls. Those paintings still exist. In the Tassili Niger Plateau in Algeria, rock art shows swimming people, herders with long-horned cattle, women gathering grain, children playing near water. This was not a wasteland, it was a garden, and it lasted for 9,000 years, nearly 4 times longer than all of recorded history. The people of the Green Sahara had everything: water, food, animals, safety. They buried their dead with ceremony. They built stone structures. They lived better than almost any humans before them, and they had no idea that their paradise was already dying. The cause was not a volcano or a comet. It was something slower, more patient, and in some ways more cruel. The Earth's orbit had shifted, and the rains were about to stop. The Earth wobbles. It is a slow, lazy wobble that takes 26,000 years to complete. And 5,500 years ago, that wobble shifted the monsoon rains. The rains that had watered the Sahara for thousands of years began moving south. Not suddenly, not violently, but steadily. Year by year, the storms came later. The grass grew thinner. The lake shrank. The people noticed. Grandparents told grandchildren about rivers that no longer flowed, about hunting grounds that had turned to dust. But they could not stop it. No one could. Within a few hundred years, the green Sahara died. Lakes that had been deep enough for hippos became muddy ponds, then dry cracks in the earth. Rivers that had carried fishing boats became dry beds of sand. The grasslands turned to desert. The animals left or died, and the people, they had a choice: stay and perish, or leave everything they had ever known. They left, tens of thousands of climate refugees. They packed their cattle, their grain, their tools, their children, and they walked. Some went south into the forests of West and Central Africa, but others went east, toward the only water source that had not failed. A river that flowed year-round from distant mountains, the Nile. The Nile Valley was narrow, just a thin strip of green surrounded by endless desert, and suddenly it was filling with refugees. The pressure was about to create something the world had never seen. The Nile Valley became a pressure cooker. Thousands of refugees poured into a strip of land barely wider than a river. They brought different languages, different gods, different ways of doing things. And they brought cattle, herds of cattle that needed grass that only grew along the river's edge. For the first time in human history, people were packed together with nowhere else to go. And that pressure did something remarkable. It created civilization. Within just a few centuries of the Sahara drying up, the Nile Valley transformed. Small villages grew into towns. Towns grew into cities. People invented writing. They built temples. They organized armies. They created a king. The first true civilization on Earth, ancient Egypt. The pyramids, the pharaohs, the hieroglyphs. All of it exists because a desert killed everyone who tried to live anywhere else. Without that climate catastrophe, without thousands of refugees fleeing a dying paradise, Egypt might never have risen. The people who painted those happy scenes on cave walls in Algeria did not know they were watching the birth of history. They only knew they were losing their home. But Egypt was not the only civilization born from disaster. Across the ocean, another catastrophe was about to force humanity to adapt. And this one began with a wall of water. 7,600 years ago, the Black Sea was not a sea. It was a lake. A massive freshwater lake, fed by rivers flowing from the mountains of Europe and Asia. Its shores were green and gentle, fish swam in its depths, birds nested in its reeds. And people lived all around it, thousands of them. They built wooden houses on stilts above the water. They fished from boats they carved from single trees. They made pottery decorated with swirling lines. They buried their children with beads and tools for the afterlife. They had no idea that their lake was sitting in a bowl, and that bowl was about to overflow. Below the lake, the Mediterranean Sea waited, saltwater, hungry, rising. For thousands of years after the last ice age, the Mediterranean had been climbing. Glaciers melted. Oceans swelled. The Mediterranean rose with them. But a ridge of land at what is now Istanbul held it back, the Bosporus, a thin strip of earth separating the salty sea from the freshwater lake. On one side, the Mediterranean stood hundreds of feet higher than the lake. On the other side, people lived in peace. The ridge held. For centuries, it held. And then it didn't. The breach did not happen slowly. When the Bosporus failed, the Mediterranean did not trickle through. It exploded. The water came from the west, where no water had ever come from before. The Bosporus ridge collapsed, and the Mediterranean Sea poured through the gap like a river turned sideways. The flow was not measured in gallons. It was measured in cubic kilometers. Every single day, 40 cubic kilometers of salt water crashed into the freshwater lake. That is 200 Niagara Falls, running continuously. Through a single gap in the earth, the water level of the Black Sea rose 15 centimeters every day. The shorelines had moved inland at a speed of 1 mile per day in flat areas. People who went to sleep next to calm water woke up underwater. The settlements did not have time to flee. Wooden houses on stilts were ripped from their foundations. Fishing boats were smashed against cliffs. Fields that had grown grain for generations turned salty and dead. Children, parents, grandparents. They ran for higher ground. Many did not make it. The water was cold, fast, relentless. Within a few years, the freshwater lake was gone. In its place, a salt sea, the Black Sea we know today. And the people who survived, they fled in every direction, carrying their stories with them. Those stories would become something unexpected. They would become the oldest myth in human history, the myth of a great flood that drowned the world. The survivors carried one story with them above all others. The story of the day the water rose and would not stop. They told it to their children. Their children told it to their children. For thousands of years, the story traveled. West into Europe, south into Mesopotamia, east into Asia, and eventually it was written down. The Epic of Gilgamesh, carved into clay tablets in ancient Iraq, tells of a great flood sent by angry gods. A man builds a boat. He saves his family and the animals. The waters cover the world. Then they recede. The man offers a sacrifice. The gods are pleased. Sound familiar? The biblical story of Noah is almost identical. Same flood, same boat, same animals, same ending. The Greeks had Deucalion, the Hindus had Manu, the Chinese had Gunyu. Every ancient civilization around the Black Sea and the Mediterranean preserves the same memory. A great flood that drowned almost everyone. Scientists used to dismiss these stories as myth, imagination, symbolism. But now we know the truth. The flood myths are not fiction. They are trauma, passed down through 300 generations, from grandparents who watched the sea rise and swallow their homes. But not every catastrophe left a story. The next one left something else, silence, and bones buried beneath a dry lake bed in Australia. 42,000 years ago, in the dry heart of what would become Australia, a young woman died. Her community did not leave her body to the scavengers. They built a fire, a large fire, hot enough to burn bone. They placed her on the flames and watched until nothing remained but ash and fragments. Then they collected her remains. They crushed the burned bones carefully, deliberately, and they buried her in a shallow grave near the edge of a lake. That woman is now called Mungo Lady, and she represents the oldest known cremation in the world. Nearby, a man was buried differently. His body was laid out straight, covered in red ochre, a mineral that gleams like blood in the sunlight. His grave was prepared with ritual and care. He is called Mungo Man. These were not primitive people. They were fully modern humans. They had language, culture, spirituality. They believed in something beyond death. They had boats capable of crossing open ocean. They had reached Australia when the rest of the world was still hunting with wooden spears. And they built their lives around a lake that was full of water. Water that would not last. The lake was their grocery store, their water supply, their cemetery, their home. They thought it would always be there. They were wrong. Beginning around 40,000 years ago, the rains stopped coming, and the lake began to die. The lake shrank slowly, not like Toba, not like the Bosporus. This was a death by inches. Each year, the rains came later. Each year, the water receded further from the shore. The fish died first, then the waterfowl left. Then the plants along the banks turned brown and brittle. The people who had buried their dead with ochre and fire watched their world transform into dust. They had a choice, stay and starve, or abandon the graves of their ancestors. They left. The lake beds turned to dry clay. The wind sculpted the shore into strange shapes. And the bones of Mungo Lady and Mungo Man were covered by sand, forgotten for 40,000 years. But the people were not the only ones who suffered. Shortly after humans arrived in Australia, the continent's giants began to die. Giant kangaroos that stood 3 meters tall, wombats the size of rhinoceroses, lizards longer than a car, marsupial lions with blade-like teeth. All of them vanished within a few thousand years of human arrival. Some scientists blame hunting. Others blame climate change. The truth is probably both. Humans arrived just as the continent was drying. The animals could not adapt fast enough. And the people? They survived. But they lost something. They lost the world they had known. The graves of Lake Mungo are all that remain of a people who might have built something great, if only the water had held. But the next catastrophe was not about water. It was about a different species, our cousins, and we are the reason they are gone. 40,000 years ago, somewhere in the caves of what is now Gibraltar, the last Neanderthal on Earth drew her final breath. We do not know her name. We do not know how she died. We do not know if she understood that she was the last of her kind. But we know this. For 400,000 years, her ancestors had walked the forests and mountains of Europe. They had survived ice ages that would have killed modern humans. They had buried their dead with flowers. They had cared for their sick and injured. Skeletons have been found of Neanderthals who lived for years with broken bones, lost teeth, and crippling injuries. They could not have survived without help. Someone fed them. Someone carried them. Someone loved them. They built structures deep inside caves, rings made from broken stalagmites. Built 176,000 years ago, they had to carry fire into the darkness. They had to cooperate. They had to plan. These were not brutes. They were people. And then we arrived. Modern humans crossed from Africa into Europe around 45,000 years ago. The two species lived side by side for roughly 5,000 years. And then the Neanderthals began to disappear. Not in a war, not in a single battle. They faded. Their population shrank. Their territories contracted. The last holdouts retreated to the southern tip of Europe, to Gibraltar, to the caves overlooking the sea. They did not vanish entirely. Fragments of them still exist. Inside you, The two species did not just fight, they mated. Genetic analysis has proven it. Every person alive today whose ancestors come from outside Africa carries between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA. Look at your immune system, your skin, your hair, the way your blood clots, the way you respond to sunlight. All of these traits have been shaped by DNA from a species that went extinct 40,000 years ago. The Neanderthals did not vanish. They were absorbed. Their children became our ancestors. Their blood flows in our veins, but absorption is still extinction. Their unique lineage, their culture, their language, their way of seeing the world, all of it is gone. What killed them? Climate change played a role. The world was unstable. Disease may have played a role. Modern humans carried illnesses that Neanderthals had never faced. Competition certainly played a role. We reproduced faster. We had slightly better tools, slightly larger social networks. Over thousands of years, slightly was enough. But there is another possibility, the most painful one. We simply outnumbered them. There were more of us. We took the best land, the best hunting grounds, the best caves, and the Neanderthals retreated to the margins. Their populations dwindled until there were no mates left to find. The last few died alone. The final members of a people who had walked the earth for nearly 500,000 years. But they were not the last of our kind to be wiped out by catastrophe. The next event nearly took us too. 39,000 years ago, in what is now southern Italy, a volcano called Flegrei erupted with a force that rivals anything in human history. Not Toba, but close. The Campanian ignimbrite eruption released 300 cubic kilometers of ash and rock into the sky. That is 300 times more than Mount St. Helens. The ash column rose 40 kilometers high. Pyroclastic flows, clouds of gas and debris hot enough to melt rock, raced across the Bay of Naples. They buried everything within hundreds of kilometers. Ash fell as far away as central Russia. And here is what makes this eruption different from all the others. Two species of humans were living in Europe when it happened. The Neanderthals, already dying. And us, modern humans just beginning to spread. The eruption did not choose sides. The ash buried Neanderthal camps and modern human camps alike. The sulfur dioxide cooled the planet. The vegetation died, the animals died. The cold lasted for decades. When the ash finally settled, the Neanderthals were gone. Not because of the eruption alone, but because the eruption was the final blow, the last push over the edge. And modern humans? We survived, but barely. Genetic evidence shows that European populations collapsed during this period. The ancestors of every European alive today passed through a narrow bottleneck. A small group of survivors who somehow endured the cold, the darkness, and the hunger. The line between survival and extinction was drawn by a mountain nobody had ever considered dangerous, until it killed them. And that brings us to the final event. The one that happened most recently. The one that changed Europe forever. 8,200 years ago, there was a country that no map shows. It lay beneath what is now the North Sea, between England and Denmark. Its name is Doggerland. And it was home to thousands of people. Rolling hills, rivers full of fish, forests full of deer, marshes full of birds. The people of Doggerland did not have cities or kings. They had something better. They had stability. For thousands of years, they had hunted, fished, and gathered along the shores of a great freshwater lake at the center of their land. They knew every stream, every cave, every migration route of the red deer herds. They buried their dead on the high ground and told stories about the old days when the land connected to the mainland. Then the sea began to rise, the glaciers were melting, the oceans climbed. Doggerland shrank slowly. Generation by generation, the coast moved inland. Grandparents told children about forests that had become beaches, about valleys that had become bays. But the people adapted. They moved to higher ground. They changed their hunting patterns. They survived. Until the sea stopped rising slowly. On a day like any other, off the coast of Norway, a massive section of the continental shelf gave way. The Storegga slide. 3,500 cubic kilometers of sediment collapsed into the deep ocean. It triggered a tsunami. Waves as high as 20 meters raced toward Doggerland. The wave struck without warning. It swept across the low-lying island, killing everyone in its path. It salted the soil so nothing would grow. It destroyed the freshwater lake. The survivors, if there were any, fled to the high ground of what is now Britain. But their homeland was gone. Within a few centuries, Doggerland disappeared entirely beneath the waves. Today, fishermen trawling the North Sea pull up stone tools from the ocean floor. Bone fragments, antler weapons, the occasional human skull, an entire country preserved in the dark water. The people of Doggerland did not build pyramids. They did not invent writing. They were just people, like you. and the sea erased them so completely that we did not even know their country existed until modern sonar found it. You thought we were done. 10 events, you were told, but there is an 11th, one that does not get the attention it deserves, because it almost ended the most important experiment in human history: farming. 8,200 years ago, just as the first farmers were learning to stay in one place, just as villages were becoming towns, just as humanity was taking its first shaky steps towards civilization, the climate collapsed again. Temperatures dropped up to 3 degrees Celsius across the northern hemisphere. Droughts lasted for decades. The rains that watered the first wheat and barley fields simply stopped. The cause was not a volcano or a comet, it was a lake, a massive lake in North America called Lake Agassiz. It was bigger than all the modern Great Lakes combined, and it was held back by a wall of ice. When that ice wall failed, 163,000 cubic kilometers of fresh water surged into the North Atlantic. That is enough water to cover the entire United States in several meters of ice-cold flood. The salt water currents that warm Europe shut down, and the world froze. The first farmers watched their crops wither. Their stored grain ran out. Their children went hungry. And many of them did something that had not happened in thousands of years. They abandoned their villages and went back to hunting and gathering. The great experiment almost failed. Çatalhöyük, one of the first true cities, located in modern Turkey. At its peak, nearly 8,000 people lived there. They packed their houses so tightly together that there were no streets. You entered through a hole in the roof and climbed down a wooden ladder. Inside, you found plaster walls painted with hunting scenes and wild animals. Skulls of oxen mounted on the walls. Platforms where the dead were buried beneath the floor. Your ancestors slept beneath you. Your children played above them. This was the new way. Settled. Permanent. Civilized. And then the drought came. The rain stopped. The wheat withered. The barley turned brown. The herds of sheep and cattle that grazed around the town could find nothing to eat. The people of Çatalhöyük did not leave immediately. They tried to adapt. They dug wells. They rationed food. They prayed to gods painted on their walls. But the dry years stretched into decades. The population declined. The great experiment was failing. Across the Fertile Crescent, dozens of early farming villages were abandoned entirely. Their mud brick walls crumbled. Their painted rooms filled with dust. The people scattered. They became nomads again, foragers again, ghosts of what they had been building. But not everyone gave up. A few communities held on. And the ones that survived did something desperate. They changed everything. You thought we were done. 10 events, you were told. But there is an 11th, one that does not get the attention it deserves, because it almost ended the most important experiment in human history: farming. 8,200 years ago, just as the first farmers were learning to stay in one place, just as villages were becoming towns, just as humanity was taking its first shaky steps towards civilization, the climate collapsed again. Temperatures dropped up to 3 degrees Celsius across the northern hemisphere. Droughts lasted for decades. The rains that watered the first wheat and barley fields simply stopped. The cause was not a volcano or a comet, it was a lake, a massive lake in North America called Lake Agassiz. It was bigger than all the modern Great Lakes combined, and it was held back by a wall of ice. When that ice wall failed, 163,000 cubic kilometers of fresh water surged into the North Atlantic. That is enough water to cover the entire United States in several meters of ice-cold flood. The salt water currents that warm Europe shut down, and the world froze. The first farmers watched their crops wither. Their stored grain ran out. Their children went hungry. And many of them did something that had not happened in thousands of years. They abandoned their villages and went back to hunting and gathering. The great experiment almost failed. Çatalhöyük, one of the first true cities, located in modern Turkey. At its peak, nearly 8,000 people lived there. They packed their houses so tightly together that there were no streets. You entered through a hole in the roof and climbed down a wooden ladder. Inside, you found plaster walls painted with hunting scenes and wild animals. Skulls of oxen mounted on the walls. Platforms where the dead were buried beneath the floor. Your ancestors slept beneath you. Your children played above them. This was the new way. Settled. Permanent. Civilized. And then the drought came, the rains stopped, the wheat withered. The barley turned brown. The herds of sheep and cattle that grazed around the town could find nothing to eat. The people of Çatalhöyük did not leave immediately. They tried to adapt. They dug wells. They rationed food. They prayed to gods painted on their walls. But the dry years stretched into decades. The population declined. The great experiment was failing. Across the Fertile Crescent, dozens of early farming villages were abandoned entirely. Their mud brick walls crumbled. Their painted rooms filled with dust. The people scattered. They became nomads again, foragers again, ghosts of what they had been building. But not everyone gave up. A few communities held on, and the ones that survived did something desperate. They changed everything. The survivors looked at the dry sky and the dead fields. They could have walked away. Many did. But the ones who stayed asked a different question. Not how do we survive this year, but how do we never let this happen again? Their answer changed the world. They built reservoirs. Holes in the ground lined with clay to hold water through the dry months. They dug canals. Channels that brought river water to fields too far from the bank. They invented irrigation. And with irrigation came surplus, extra food that could be stored, traded, fought over, controlled. The villages that survived the 8.2 kiloyear event did not just recover, they transformed. They grew into towns. The towns grew into city-states. The city-states grew into empires. Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, the cradle of civilization, all of it built on the foundations of a drought that almost killed farming forever. The people who lived through that cold snap did not know they were saving the future. They were just trying to feed their children, but their ditches and dams became the first infrastructure. Their stored grain became the first wealth. Their walls became the first defenses. And here is the part they do not teach in school. Without that catastrophe, without that pressure, agriculture might have remained a small experiment, a local curiosity. The drought forced innovation, and innovation built the world you live in. Step back, look at the pattern. Toba, Younger Dryas, Sahara drying, Black Sea flood, Lake Mungo, Neanderthal extinction, Campi Flegrei, Doggerland, the 8.2 kiloyear event, 9 others. Every single one of them should have been the end. Every single one of them took humanity to the edge of oblivion. And every single time, a few hundred or a few thousand people found a way through. They found shelter, they found food, they found each other. They did not give up. But here is the truth that keeps scientists awake at night. That pattern is not over. The Earth is still wobbling. The volcanoes are still sleeping under Yellowstone, under Naples, under Sumatra. The comets are still out there in the dark, waiting for their orbit to cross ours. The climate is still changing. The difference is that now there are 8 billion of us, and we have built a world that depends on everything working perfectly. Global supply chains, just-in-time delivery, power grids with no backup. One volcano like Toba today would not just kill millions, it would collapse civilization. The famine would be global. The panic would be unimaginable. We are not stronger than our ancestors. We are just luckier so far. The sky turned black on a Tuesday. Not that they had names for days yet, but it happened suddenly. One morning, the sun was there. By afternoon, it was gone. Ash fell like snow for weeks. The rivers ran thick with dust. The animals died first, then the children, then the hope. That was 74,000 years ago. And yet here you are, reading these words, breathing this air, existing. The thread of human survival did not break. It stretched, it thinned. It nearly vanished more times than we can count, but it held. Every time the sky turned black, someone found shelter. Every time the water rose, someone found higher ground. Every time the cold came, someone found fire. You are not just a person. You are the descendant of survivors, of the lucky ones, of the ones who refuse to die. But here is the question the scientists cannot answer. How much longer can the thread hold? The same forces that ended the Neanderthals, that drowned Doggerland, that turned the Sahara to dust, they are still here. The volcanoes are still sleeping. The comets are still out there. The climate is still shifting. We have cities now, technology, satellites, nuclear weapons. But nature does not care about any of that. It has been trying to kill us for 300,000 years. And it is very, very patient. The next catastrophe is already on its way. We just do not know what it is, or when it will arrive, or if this time the thread will finally break. One morning, the sun will be there. By afternoon, it could be gone. The only question is whether you are paying attention. You have heard the numbers. 3,000 survivors after Toba. A handful of families after the Younger Dryas. Refugees fleeing the Green Sahara. The last Neanderthal dying alone in a cave. But numbers do not tell the whole story. Behind every number was a person. A mother who carried her child through ashfall. A father who built a boat as the water rose. A grandmother who remembered when the lake was full and told stories to children who would never see it. These people did not know they were saving humanity. They were just trying to live one more day. We glorify kings and conquerors. We build statues to generals and presidents. But the real heroes of human history are the nobodies. The ones who found food when there was no food. Who made fire when the sky was dark. Who held a dying child and kept walking anyway. They did not leave their names in any history book. They left their DNA in you, in everyone you have ever met. The thread of survival is woven from millions of small, desperate acts of courage that no one recorded. But here is something uncomfortable. Not every survivor was heroic. Some of them were just lucky. And luck is not something you can pass down to your children. Let us be honest about something most history videos ignore. Luck matters. The people who survived Toba were not the strongest or the smartest. They were just in the right place. A valley that did not get as much ash. A cave facing the right direction. A river that kept flowing when others dried up. That is not a moral lesson, that is geology. The survivors of the Younger Dryas did not outthink the comet. They were simply far enough south that the fires did not reach them. The people of Doggerland did not die because they were weak. They died because a tsunami struck their island on a Tuesday. It could have struck on Wednesday. They would have been fishing instead of sleeping. They would have lived. This matters because we like to believe that we control our fate, that hard work and good choices will save us. The prehistoric record says otherwise. Entire cultures vanished because the rain stopped, because the wind changed, because mountains exploded that had been quiet for 1,000,000 years. The difference between your ancestors being alive or dead was often a matter of meters. A little higher ground, a little farther from the coast, a little luck. And that brings us to the present. How lucky are we, and how long will our luck hold? We live in a world that pretends to be safe. Weather forecasts tell us when the rain will come. Satellites watch for hurricanes. Seismometers track every tremor. We have vaccines. Fire departments. Emergency broadcasts. We have convinced ourselves that nature is manageable, that the old catastrophes could not happen again because we are too smart. That is an illusion. The same volcano that erupted at Campi Flegrei 39,000 years ago is still there. It is still active. Scientists monitor it constantly because they know it could erupt again. The same fault lines that shook the Younger Dryas are still shifting. The same comets are still orbiting. The difference is not safety. The difference is awareness. We know the risks now, but knowing does not stop a supervolcano. It does not redirect a comet. It does not make the sea level stop rising. The only thing technology has given us is a false sense of control. We are not safer than the people of Doggerland. We are just better at pretending. And here is the scariest part. We have added a new danger that our ancestors never faced, ourselves. The prehistoric events in this video were natural: volcanoes, comets, climate shifts. No one caused them. No one could have stopped them. But the next great catastrophe might not be natural. It might be us. Nuclear weapons, engineered pandemics, artificial intelligence, climate change accelerated by industry. We've become a geological force. What took volcanoes millions of years to release, we release in decades. And we are not nearly as careful as we think. The difference between Toba and tomorrow is intent. Toba did not mean to kill 99% of humans. This was just a mountain doing what mountains do. But if we destroy ourselves, it will not be an accident. It will be a choice. A series of small, selfish decisions that add up to extinction. The people of the Green Sahara did not choose to turn their home into a desert. But we are choosing. Every day, with every tank of gas, every plastic bottle, every war. The thread held for 300,000 years, but threads can be cut, and we are holding the scissors. Let us go back to the beginning. 74,000 years ago, a few thousand survivors huddled in caves. The sky was black, the world was cold. They did not know if the sun would ever return. They did not know if their children would live. They did not know if humanity would survive. But they kept breathing. They kept searching for food. They kept telling stories. They kept hoping. And because they did, you exist. Every person you love exists. Every city, every song, every invention, every moment of joy in human history exists because a handful of people refused to give up. That is not a guarantee. That is not a promise. It is a warning. Their survival was not inevitable. It was not destiny. It was a near miss, a lucky break, a thread that almost snapped a dozen times. And it can still snap. The volcanoes are still there. The comets are still out there. The climate is still changing. And now, we have added our own dangers to the list. So here is the question, the one that no scientist can answer, the one that no historian can predict. When the next catastrophe comes, will the thread hold? Will there be survivors? And will they be us? Or will some future species dig up our bones and wonder what happened to the people who had everything and threw it away? The sky turned black on a Tuesday. Not that they had names for daisies yet, but it happened suddenly. And it can happen again. The only difference is this time we have no excuse to say we did not know. Before we finish, let us sit with something uncomfortable. The people we have talked about in this video. The ones who died at Toba. The ones who drowned in the Black Sea. The ones who starved when the Sahara dried. They were not statistics. They were not primitive cave people waiting for civilization to arrive. They were us. They had the same brains, the same emotions, the same love for their children. They told jokes around fires. They held hands when they were scared. They dreamed about the future. And then, through no fault of their own, their world ended. We do not know their names. We do not know their stories. The ash buried their songs. The water flooded their homes. The drought scattered their families. But we know they existed. Their bones are in museums. Their DNA is in some of us. Their footprints are preserved in layers of volcanic ash, showing exactly where they ran and where they fell. They deserve more than to be forgotten. They deserve to be remembered as what they were. The reason we are here, but remembering is not enough, because the same forces that killed them are still active. And we have added a few of our own. Here is where you come in. We have walked through 11 catastrophic events, some natural, some unavoidable, some caused by climate shifts that took thousands of years. But here is the question this video cannot answer for you. Do you feel differently now than you did 90 minutes ago? Do you look at the sky differently? Do you think about the ground beneath your feet? Do you wonder what the next catastrophe will be and whether you would survive it? These are not rhetorical questions. These are survival questions. Our ancestors asked them every single day. That is why they lived. That is why you are here. But modern life has made us soft. We assume the lights will always turn on. The store will always have food. The ground will always be still. History says otherwise. History says everything can change in an afternoon. So before you click away, take a moment. Look around your room, your house, your street. Ask yourself one question. If the sky turned black tomorrow, what would you do? If you do not have an answer, you are not paying attention. This channel exists because the past is not dead. It is not even past. The same patterns that destroyed civilizations thousands of years ago are still at work. Volcanoes, climate shifts, comets, human arrogance. We cover them not to scare you, but to prepare you. Awareness is not fear. Awareness is the opposite of fear. Fear is what happens when you are surprised. Awareness is what happens when you have already thought about the worst case and made a plan. In the coming weeks, we will dive deeper into specific events, the real science behind Toba, the latest research on the Younger Dryas crater, the genetic evidence hiding inside your own cells. We will talk about what governments are doing to prepare for the next supereruption and what they are not doing. We will talk about the comets we have found and the ones we have not. And we will talk about the man-made catastrophes that could make all of nature's efforts look gentle. If you have made it this far, you are not a passive viewer. You are a thinker, a questioner, someone who wants to know the truth even when it is uncomfortable. That is rare. That is valuable. That is exactly the kind of person who survives. The next video is already being written. It is about a disaster that almost happened but did not. A near miss that you have probably never heard of. In 2012, a solar storm missed Earth by 9 days. If it had hit, it would have fried every electrical grid on the planet. No power, no water, no internet, no hospitals, no food deliveries. The modern world would have collapsed in a matter of weeks. And the storm? It was completely natural, completely unpredictable, completely survivable if you knew what to do. Most people would not have known. That video will teach you. It will teach you what to stock, what to learn, who to trust. Because the next catastrophe is not a matter of if. It is a matter of when. And when it comes, the people who survive will not be the richest or the strongest. They will be the ones who paid attention. The sky turned black on a Tuesday. That Tuesday is coming. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not this year. But it is coming. Thank you for staying, for thinking, for caring about the people who came before us and the people who will come after. You are the thread. You are the survivor. You are the reason humanity has made it this far. Do not break the chain. You have just spent nearly 2 hours walking through the worst moments in human history. 11 times the planet tried to erase us. 11 times the thread held by the thinnest possible margin. You have heard about ash falls that buried continents, tsunamis that drowned entire countries, comets that set the sky on fire, droughts that turned gardens into deserts. You have met our cousins, the Neanderthals, who vanished into our bloodline. You have stood at the graves of people who died so long ago that their names are not even a memory. And now, you are back in your chair, back in your room, back in a world that feels safe. But does it still feel safe? That is the question this video was designed to ask. Not to make you afraid, but to make you aware. Because fear paralyzes, awareness prepares. The people who survived Toba were not fearless. They were terrified. But they kept moving. They kept searching for food. They kept protecting their children. They did not curl up and wait for death. And neither should you. The difference between them and us is not courage, it is practice. They knew how to survive because they had no choice. We have forgotten. Think about your average day. You wake up, you turn on a light, you open a refrigerator, you drive a car, you look at a screen. Every single one of those actions depends on systems you do not understand. Electricity, refrigeration, fuel, the internet. If those systems vanish tomorrow, would you know how to find water? Would you know which wild plants are edible? Would you know how to start a fire without a lighter? How to build shelter without a hardware store? How to treat a wound without a pharmacy? Our ancestors knew all of these things. They taught their children. Their children taught their children. For 300,000 years, survival knowledge was the most valuable thing a person could own. Now we outsource that knowledge to experts, to governments, to technology. And that works perfectly until it does not. The people of Doggerland thought their world was permanent. They had lived there for thousands of years. The sea had never risen that fast before. They were wrong. You are not smarter than the people of Doggerland. You are just luckier. So far, we like to tell ourselves a story, the story of progress. The idea that every generation is smarter, stronger, and better prepared than the one before. That history is a straight line upward from caves to cities to space travel. That the worst is behind us. That story is comforting. It is also false. The people of the Green Sahara had a civilization that lasted longer than all of recorded history. 9,000 years of stability. 9,000 years of painting happy scenes on cave walls. 9,000 years of believing their world would never end. Then the rain stopped, and their civilization collapsed up so completely that we did not even know it existed until satellites spotted ancient riverbeds beneath the sand. Progress is not a guarantee, it is a temporary condition. Every civilization in history has assumed it would last forever. Every single one has been wrong. The Egyptians, the Romans, the Maya, the people of Easter Island who cut down their last tree and watched their world wash away. We are not special, we are not immune, we are just next. The only question is what will bring us down? A volcano? A comet? A climate shift? Or something we have not even imagined yet? Let us talk about the threats we know about but do nothing about. Yellowstone, the supervolcano beneath America's national park. It erupts roughly every 600,000 years. The last eruption was 640,000 years ago. We are overdue, not by a little, by 40,000 years. When Yellowstone erupts again, it will bury half of North America in ash. The rest of the world will freeze. Famine will be global. And there is nothing we can do to stop it. The Tohoku Fault, off the coast of Japan, it produces a massive earthquake every 400 to 600 years. The last one was in 2011. That one killed 20,000 people and caused a nuclear meltdown. The next one could be worse. The Cascadia Subduction Zone, off the coast of the Pacific Northwest. It produces a magnitude 9 earthquake every 300 years. The last one was in 1700. That was 324 years ago. When it goes, Seattle, Portland, and Vancouver will be destroyed in minutes. The tsunami will cross the ocean and hit Japan. We know these things. We have maps, models, warning systems. But we do not prepare, because preparing is expensive, because preparing is scary, because we would rather believe it will not happen in our lifetime. Here is something that should keep you awake. NASA has identified only about 40% of near-Earth objects larger than 140 meters. Objects big enough to destroy a city. Objects that could hit us with no warning. The Chelyabinsk meteor that exploded over Russia in 2013 was only 20 meters across. It injured 1,500 people. It broke windows in 6 cities. It was not detected before it entered the atmosphere. Imagine if it had been larger. Imagine if it had been the size of the Younger Dryas comet. Imagine if it hit New York instead of open ocean. The dinosaurs did not see the asteroid that killed them. They had no warning, no evacuation plan. No backup, neither do we. We have telescopes, we have computer models. We have brilliant scientists tracking the sky every night. But space is big, really big, and comets are dark. Some of them we will not see until they are months away. Some of them we will not see until they hit. The next great extinction could already be on its way. It could be a decade out, a year out, a day out. We would not know until it was too late. But let us stop looking at the sky for a moment. Let us look at each other. Because the most likely catastrophe is not a volcano or a comet. It is us, nuclear war. Engineered pandemics, uncontrolled artificial intelligence, climate collapse. These are not science fiction. These are active risks that experts have been warning about for decades. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist maintains the doomsday clock. It represents how close humanity is to destroying itself. Right now, it is set at 90 seconds to midnight, the closest it has ever been. Closer than during the Cold War. Closer than during the Cuban Missile Crisis. We have normalized this. We scroll past headlines about nuclear posturing and climate tipping points, like they are sports scores. We have accepted a 90 seconds to midnight world as normal. It is not normal. It is insane. The people of the Green Sahara did not see their drought coming. We see ours coming. We just refuse to look. The difference between survival and extinction is not ability, it is will. And our will is failing. This is not a political video. This is not a lecture. This is a survival guide, and here is the first rule of survival. Do not panic. Panic kills faster than any disaster. The people who survived Toba did not panic. They assessed. They adapted, they acted. You can do the same. Start small. Learn one skill this week. How to find water, how to start a fire, how to treat a wound. One skill. Practice it until it becomes automatic. Then learn another. Build a community. The survivors of every catastrophe had one thing in common. They were not alone. They had people they trusted, people who shared food, shared shelter, shared information. Isolation is death. Connection is survival. Talk to your neighbors. Join a local group. Know who you would call and where you would go if the lights went out tonight. The second rule of survival is more uncomfortable. Accept that you might have to do things you never imagined. The people of Doggerland did not want to leave their homes. They left anyway. Because staying meant death. The survivors of the 8.2 kiloyear event did not give up when their crops failed. They invented irrigation. The survivors of Campy Flegray did not curse the sky when the ash fell. They found shelter. The survivors of Toba did not sit down and wait to die. They kept walking. The mindset that saved them is available to you. It is called anti-fragility, not just surviving. Growing stronger because of the stress. Learning from the disaster. Adapting. Our ancestors were anti-fragile. Every catastrophe made them better, harder, smarter. That is why we are here, but modern life has made us fragile. We expect comfort, predictability, safety. We get anxious when our internet slows down. We get angry when the grocery store is out of our favorite brand. We have forgotten what real danger feels like, and that forgetting is itself a danger. The next catastrophe will separate the fragile from the anti-fragile. Which one will you be? Before we close, I want you to do something. Stop reading for a moment. Look around your room, your house, your street. Ask yourself 3 questions. First, if you had to leave your home in 5 minutes, what would you take? Not what you would want to take, what you would actually grab. Second, if the power went out for a month, would you have enough food and water? Be honest. Third, who would you call? Who would call you? Survival is not individual. It is social. If you do not have answers to these questions, you have work to do. Do not feel bad about that. Our ancestors did not know how to survive until they learned. You can learn too. Start tonight. Make a list. Buy a water filter. Take a first aid class. Talk to your neighbor. Small actions. Consistent actions. The thread of human survival is woven from millions of small actions. Add your thread. And here is the most important thing. Do not wait. The people of Pompeii did not think the volcano would erupt. It did. The people of New Orleans did not think the levees would fail. They did. The people of Doggerland did not think the sea would swallow their island. It did. The sky turned black on a Tuesday. Not that they had names for days yet, but it happened suddenly. And it will happen again. Not maybe, not possibly. It will happen. The only unknowns are when and how and whether we will be ready. You have spent 2 hours walking through the worst of our past. Now go spend 2 hours preparing for the future. Learn something. Build something. Connect with someone. Do not be a victim. Be a survivor. That is what your ancestors were. That is what your descendants need you to be. Subscribe if you want to stay aware. Hit the bell if you want to be ready. And remember, the ground is never as still as you think. The sky is never as safe as it looks. And the only thing that has ever saved us is paying attention. The next video is waiting. It is about the near misses. The catastrophes that almost happened but did not. The solar storm of 2012. The asteroid that passed between the Earth and the Moon. The nuclear close calls you have never heard about. You will not want to miss it. See you in the next one. Stay awake.